Well, John, I have some good news, and I have some bad news. What do you want first?
Well, hit me with the bad news first so we can rebound if anybody's still listening with the good news.
Well, the bad news is this is now our worst ever episode.
Oh, why?
It's our second episode, so it's probably worse than the first one, right? So, I mean, right away, it just becomes our worst episode, I think.
By default, you're right. We had like years of talking and being buds and hanging out and texting nearly daily to get prepared for the first one, and then we're just gonna come out with this pile of crap.
Yeah, so that's pretty much where we are now. I guess I was hoping you were going to say that you wanted the good news first, because I was going to say, well, the good news is this is our second ever podcast.
True.
And then, I mean, as usual, you kind of dropped the ball there, but hey, it is what it is, I guess.
Listen, I've always warned you. We're working together in something professional. There's a high probability I'm going to screw it up and screw it up often.
Yep, and so far, I guess in that regard, you haven't disappointed.
Hey, I am living up to expectations. Set the bar low and keep it there. So after disappointing you so horrifically, Joel, I figure, though, you being the craft beer guy, I can impress you with tonight's recording beer of choice. I've taken Nachos Pale Ale out of Nokomis, Saskatchewan. You know what I love? I love the fact that they actually put, like, the address on here.
Yeah.
Like, First Avenue East in Nokomis, SOG3RO. That's how you know it's local. And normally I'm not much of a can guy, but man, this stuff out of a can is delightful.
Yeah, I cracked into one of those the other day, and I have to tell you that beer in a can is just, it's taken to a whole new level. I'm sticking locally too, well, local-ish. I mean, it's not from Regina, but I'm going down to Swift Current. I've cracked a nice little can of Blackbridge IPA, exclamation point.
Ooh, is it like super IPA, hence the exclamation point, or is it just that delicious when it touches your lips?
Yes. I don't actually know. I've never actually asked why they put an exclamation point on there, but hey, they do, and I guess that's what they call it. So,
well, I think we now have an investigative mission here, Jules, to find out why the exclamation point.
I know some people I can ask around, I guess.
You have your people call their people, and it's kind of one of those situations. I didn't know you had people, but you have people, and this makes you more impressive to me.
My people is me asking questions, but yeah.
Fair enough.
I think anyway, enough of this. There's a lot to get to this week, so we're just going to get right into it. Hang on, we're going to talk a little bit about Charleston Hughes, of course. We're going to talk a little bit about what the Riders might and should do in free agency. And I learned some very shocking news this past week about our good friend and someone I thought I respected in the Regina Leader Post, Rob Vanstone. You're going to want to hang around for this because this is truly shocking news.
I have lost all respect for Mr. Vanstone. You know, I love his stuff, but you know what? Now, every time I read it, I'll be full of disgust.
It's unbelievable. You just have to hang around for this.
That's what we call a tease, kids.
That's what we call
I guess, you know, people can hit fast forward and try to find it and get that awkward, like, and then take things without context.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't like radio where you actually had to listen for a while. You could just skip to any part of the show you want, or you could probably, as you have by now at this point, just turn us off.
But who listens to radio these days anyways? I mean, come on, that's why you and I are both on our couches. I'm now at Oakwood Nissan, and you are a beer guru.
Yeah, something like that.
It's around there.
Anyway, so the big news, I think, in Saskatchewan this week right now is news that I don't think a lot of us ever really like to talk about. There's the stuff that happens off the field sometimes, and this time it involves one of the lightning rods of the CFL in Duron Carter, as he's got into a little bit of pot possession issues because for some reason he decided it was a good idea to take it to the airport. Now, I don't know how you get to that point, how you don't think that through a little bit more. That's neither here nor there. Part that matters here is the one in Winnipeg, where it seems like he had a sizable amount of marijuana on him. So that could lead to some trouble. I don't imagine it'll be too suggestive, too strong, unless they figure that he is trafficking, but I don't think there's any reason to believe that he is at this point.
No.
So all we really can do is really just let the process play itself out and see where it lands. I don't think this is anything. The Riders shouldn't cut him for it. It shouldn't end his career. You know, maybe Chris Jones talks to him about making smarter decisions, because frankly, the only thing you can say really about this, whether he's guilty or not at this point, and right now he's innocent until proven guilty, was that this was dumb.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or doubts. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. There we go. Second try.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah, that's right. I'm clearly not a professional talker anymore, but you're absolutely right. Like, it's just a bonehead move. I know it's like kind of almost legal, like as of July, but again, nobody really has talked about what he got busted with here in Saskatoon. I think the assumption, considering I believe he was at the Kinsman dinner the very next night, I'm assuming it was very small, relatively minor. But you're right. If you actually look up how much weed he had on him when he flew through Winnipeg, pretty substantial amount, but who doesn't catch that, like, when you're getting on the plane? Like, every time I ever flew anywhere, I've always had my stuff searched. And to put on my tinfoil conspiracy hat a bit, everybody knew Duron Carter had NFL interest in this offseason. As a defensive back, as a receiver, I mean, he's charismatic, he's great at what he does. NFL teams were looking at him. And then mysteriously, almost out of the clear blue sky, he's re-signed with the Riders. I'm starting to think, though, that although, again, you and I both agree this is relatively minor, won't cost him his career in Saskatchewan, won't cost him his career in the CFL, but I wonder if it hasn't cost him a shot at the NFL. Those teams do a lot more due diligence on their guys and like guys that are robots, and they have no reason to bring on a depth wide receiver / defensive back if he's got any kind of legal trouble. So I think that maybe in the long run, call me crazy, this might end up being good for Saskatchewan. I think having Duron Carter in the CFL is a good thing. In Saskatchewan's a good thing. It might end up being good because I think this would be given his age, this might have been his last shot at the NFL, and he might have blown it by carrying a whole bunch of weed onto a plane in Winnipeg.
It's possible. I don't know if I really buy into that completely. I'm certainly not ready to rule it out, but I think for Duron, he knows it's a good fit here. Chris Jones lets his guys be his guys. Whether that's good or bad isn't really for him to decide. He lets his guys be his guys, and that works for Duron. And maybe that leads to incidents from time to time, and that leads to who knows what behind the scenes. But it's just what it is. It's a good fit for him. He took a little bit less, overall money. The structure made it work for him to take more money back home to the States, but. Yeah, sure, maybe something like this, because we know in the United States, in a lot of places, they take marijuana a lot more seriously than we do up here in Canada. So, it's a scenario where maybe that did play into it, maybe it didn't, I don't know. Either way, we'll just have to see how this plays out going forward for Duron. I think at most he'll probably face some kind of fine if he's found guilty, and then, we'll probably all just forget about it in a week anyway.
Well, and you're absolutely right, and especially with legalization being so close on the horizon here in Canada, I can't see, it really turning into anything serious. Now, if it was cocaine, different story, because that's still highly illegal. But marijuana, as we both mentioned, it's as of July. You and I will be able to light a spliff if we want while recording this thing, which might make it quite interesting because all you'd hear is the crunch of delicious, delicious nachos in the background.
Yeah. No female-generated Doritos around here.
No, we only have the manly Doritos.
Well, I don't know if I'd say it like that. Doritos are for everyone. Just let's be clear about that.
Was that not the stupidest marketing gimmick you've ever seen?
When I first saw that, I was like, "Is this like The Onion?" And like everyone's believing them. Like it made absolutely no sense. But yeah, it's clear they got some attention out of it. Good for them, I guess.
I guess, and we'll see what it does on sales. Speaking, you know what I am buying?
What are you buying?
I am buying the Riders' defensive line this year. How about going out and getting Charleston Hughes out of the Calgary Stampeders? And again, it's almost one of those situations where, you know what, I would almost trade for Charleston Hughes, leave him on my bench just so I never had to play him again.
Well, if Charleston Hughes was 30 years old, I think at that point, yeah, you would do that. So yes, I wrote about this trade on 3 Down Nation the day it happened. I was in the Ottawa airport on a delay when I wrote that, so maybe I was already a little ornery at that point. But so my thoughts on this trade are well known, but I want to be perfectly clear. In a nutshell, on itself, by itself, in a bubble, no other considerations to how this affects the franchise or what this means for the franchise. 100 times out of 100, you trade Vernon Adams for Charleston Hughes. I'm not suggesting that as a football trade, it was a bad trade. I think there's some bigger bigger picture things that we need to talk about in terms of this franchise and where they're going. But on paper, Vernon Adams, when you have Brandon Bridge, you have Zach Collaros, you have Marquise Williams, you have some other guys they're probably going to bring in, you don't need Vernon Adams. You know, the kid still might turn into something, but on face value for what that is a trade you make 100 times out of 100.
Well, especially, too, when you're moving Vernon Adams to a team that you're never going to see. Well, that's not in your division. I mean, it's the CFL. You're still going to see him. It's not like there's going to be immediate extracted revenge, like you ship them off to Edmonton or something to be the backup for Matt Nichols, because, again, the prophecy has been fulfilled of Kevin Glenn. But you're right, and it all brings up the larger issue. And this is something that actually you've been writing about on 3 Down Nation for a long time and on Twitter. It goes back to the fact that, again, the Riders are clearly in win now mode with some of these moves, but where's the young talent? And I think you said it best on Twitter when you pointed out that if Calgary's willing to let Charleston Hughes go, that means they've got somebody that they know is going to come up and be just as dangerous. And you want to see the Riders, and the Riders said they were going to come out and try to become that. And so far, they've done a pretty poor job of developing their own talent.
Yeah, I think if you look at the roster, today, it's a very good roster. It's a team that should compete for a Grey Cup. They could be in the running for it this year. I'm not taking that away from them. But if you look at, say, their top, 8, 10, 12 players, how many of them were discovered and developed by Chris Jones and John Murphy? Maybe one, maybe two. Other than that, they're guys that were either already on this franchise, like Brendan Labatt, or they were established guys like Zach Collaros and Duron Carter and Ed Gainey and all these guys that became players somewhere else and then came to Saskatchewan. So if it all depends on what this team really wants to be doing right now. So if the plan has changed, if it's not about being the next Calgary Stampeders, where you are constantly developing a pipeline of young Canadians and young Americans that come up and take over for overpaid older guys year after year after year, as we saw again this week when they let go of Markway McDaniel. I mean, this is what they do. This is what Calgary does. Better than any other team in the CFL, better than a lot of teams across professional football, period. So if that's not the plan anymore, someone just needs to come out and tell us that, hey, we're all in again. This is in 2013, they didn't want to admit they were all in until after the fact that they had already won. And yes, we were all in. So if they're all in, if it's all about winning a Grey Cup this year and forget the future, that's fine. I just want to know.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly it. But I think one thing that Jones, Murphy, O'Day have done a really good job of, they've done a really good job on selling Saskatchewan to a lot of these guys, right? I mean, you're seeing guys like Duron Carter that are superstars they got for absolutely nothing coming in and wanting to stay because, again, they call it the fan base, the modern facilities. It's almost like they're almost like a powerful NCAA team that's got the fanciest training facilities and the best stadium. And they're finally really using a good job of leveraging that. And maybe that's something they didn't expect to do, or maybe that's something they're, just doing a lot better. But it seems to me that, it's become the preeminent free agent destination. I mean, even today with a Darius Bowman signing in Winnipeg, that sounded like a personal choice of his. I mean, It sounds like the money was there from Saskatchewan. The opportunity was there from Saskatchewan to go out and get a Darius Bowman. And that's one thing that this new regime, if you still want to call him that, has done a spectacular job of so far is selling guys on the province and selling guys in the organization. And that's really not hard to do, but I think they leverage it better than previous regimes. You didn't see a lot of those marquee free agents, wanting to make Regina their home. Now you got guys that are trying to make it their home all year round.
Yeah, and that's something that has obviously changed with this franchise, and I think the new stadium above everything else has obviously helped that. They've moved.
Certainly.
The facilities are second to none right now in the CFL, and it's an easy sell. And once you start getting those veteran guys in, this is a small league. People talk. Yeah. People across this league talk. Everyone knows everyone. So they've reached a point now where I think there's enough of a reputation here for this group. When I mean this group, I mean Chris Jones, I mean John Murphy, Jeremy O'Day, the whole shebang, everyone involved. They say, you know what? This is a good group of guys to play for. Come here and let's do this. Because I will always give Chris Jones credit for being one hell of a head coach, one hell of a football coach. he definitely has that down. I still have some questions about whether he's a personnel guy or not, but I will never question how good of a coach he is, because he clearly is, and he's been able to coach a group for the last couple of years and gotten more out of them than was originally expected. So if you have that, if a guy believes in a coach, that's really the most important thing. And so Chris Jones is able to sell that because he lets his guys be his guys, and he has a system that's proven that works, and guys love to play for him.
No, and that's absolutely true. And I mean, I just think ahead to next season. Jones loves, speaking of his coaching, he loves that 3 defensive linemen. You know, fans can love it or hate it. He loves that 3 defensive linemen look. And with Charleston Hughes and Jefferson, you're going to be able to get so much pressure with just those 3 guys. You're going to be able to do so many different things defensively that, you know what, that Rider D next year is going to be really interesting. I think they're going to give a lot of teams troubles by, you know, being innovative, being smart, and once again, letting Chris Jones do his thing.
Yeah, if you're going to run out the 3-man rush as much as Chris Jones does, then you might as well have the best guys you can find do it. Now, what the Riders are looking at with this D-line right now is a fairly short window. I mean, Willie Jefferson has a number. He still has a few years left in him. I'm not worried about him. There's still some, Nick James in the middle could be a guy. He showed some promise, but they still don't really have that plug in the middle yet to really push the pocket forward. And then Charleston Hughes, we don't know. He has the history. There's nothing to suggest that he's slowing down. But, I mean, last year, John Chick fell off the map. And before that, he had a good year in Hamilton. So when you get into that range, anything's possible. So if they're doing this needs to strike and this needs to happen fast, or else suddenly this starts to look like a bad trade.
Yeah, and no, absolutely. But again, like you said, anytime you can get rid of a depth, I mean, Vernon Adams is essentially a depth quarterback at this point. You know, for a starting D lineman, you're doing things quite well. And then it gets me thinking ahead here though to free agency, Joel. And again, we don't want to go in depth and player by player and name by name. I mean, 3 Down Nation's going to have you covered for all of that. But for the 2 of us, to me, there's a couple guys out there. I know Nick Dembski looks like he's going to hit the free agent market.
Yeah.
I'm surprised the Riders are letting him go, only because he's got some versatility. He hasn't put up the big numbers that even I thought he would when he came out of the University of Manitoba. I watched him firsthand while covering the Huskies. But I think free agency is maybe where the Riders have to continue using those advantages and start filling a need. And to me, that need is Canadians all over the place. I mean, if you can't draft them, you might as well go out and try to buy them. And I think that starts coming here in free agency.
Yeah, that's probably the route they're going to have to go. They have this is how I felt about their Canadian depth the last little while. They've kind of, for the most part, shored up those 7 starters. They need the guys behind them. They need preferably you would like to start 8 or 9, so that if a guy gets hurt, it doesn't matter. You don't have to put another Canadian in his spot. So you always want to do that. That's what they did very well in 2013. I remember on that roster, you could argue there was maybe 10 guys who could probably start. I think they started 8 or 9 usually, but you could probably have about 10 on that team that actually started. So that's what they need to do. They need to shore up that depth a little bit. Now, the problem when you go into free agency looking for Canadians is the Canadians know that about half the league has to be them. So they get money, they get paid, and that makes it difficult to buy your Canadians compared to drafting and developing them. So the draft is obviously still going to be very important for them. There might be a few guys that they'll be able to snag on the free agency list, but that's more or less what they have to do. As for Nick Dembski, I'm not really that surprised. I think it might be time for him to move on and get a fresh start somewhere else. It never really took off for him here. Just for whatever reason, I don't know if he isn't a pro. That there might be enough of a sample for him now that he's not a starting Canadian in this league. It just didn't work out for whatever reason. He can still help a team in various ways, but I think at this point the Riders can find someone else who can fill that role, whether they're Canadian or not, and pick up the Canadian slack somewhere else.
And no, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's taking a look at some of the guys. I wouldn't mind. I mean, I always say that it's never a bad idea to add more Canadian depth, especially along the offensive line. I mean, you look at Kirby Fabian out of BC. He was one of their guards. If you can go out and get him, and I don't know what you do with him really, but that's one spot I'd like to see. And, other guy I'd like to see come pick up. Also with, again, the correct passport is honestly Anthony Parker. He hasn't had any massive years, but I think he'd be a nice compliment to what they're doing in Saskatchewan because, again, all that attention, you don't get so many balls to so many people, but all that attention to me is going to some of the American talent that they have on this team, and rightfully so. But I think if you're going to let Nick Dembski walk, maybe you get Anthony Parker. He's coming off of a bit of a down year. I don't think you're going to have to pay a lot for him. I don't know if a lot of teams are going to be out really bidding a ton for Anthony Parker. I think Dembski, to me, has a little bit more upside just from, again, physicality and versatility. Maybe you slide in and get a guy like Parker and you pair him with Rob Bagg.
Yeah, there's certainly a possibility there. They did re-sign Bailey recently as well, was a Canadian who showed a little bit of promise, and he's a guy that can probably step up, and he will compete with Rob Bagg for that starting Canadian receiver. Rob Bagg, maybe not the pass catcher he once was, but still provides tremendous value to the team in terms of the blocking and the routes that he runs to make things work for the offense. So there's no question there. So there is another name out there free agency-wise right now that's come up on 3 Down Nation. Our boy Justin Dunk were reporting that the Riders might have some interest in Jerome Messam, another aging guy. What is your first thoughts when you hear about that?
My first thought is do it. I mean, I saw on Twitter today he announced that he's not going to be there. I mean, he gives you durability. He gives you power running. He gives you, the Riders had some nice performances out of the backfield last year. But I think if they went out and got a guy like Messam, A, he's a total ratio buster, and B, I mean, I think he's still got lots left in the tank. I'd love to see them go out and get Messam, because to me that's one spot they're missing. I mean, you look at what Winnipeg can do when starting Andrew Harris, and again, Saskatchewan has enough Canadian depth that it's not like the last time they had Jerome Messam, and when Messam went down, it was just oh no, we have to take away from these different positions here. I think getting Jerome Messam gives you the ability with their combined Canadian depth, because at least if he goes down in a game, whatever, gets injured, you still have players you can trot out there. You don't have to completely change your lineup. I mean, like we've seen the Riders have to do in the past when the depth was a little thinner. But I think I think they should go out and get him and just give him that starting running back spot. He's been in Saskatchewan before. He was well-liked. He's a terrible interview, but I mean, hey, that's no fault on him as a football player.
Yeah, I think there certainly should be some interest there, depending on how much it costs. And I mean, they did pick up Augustine in the super secret Neglis draft a couple of weeks ago, and he was the guy that showed very well at the Combine last year here in Regina as part of CFL week, because I was there with Dunk, with Drew Edwards, with John Hodge. We all watched him, and we were all talking about, this seems like a Chris Jones guy. He would fit into the offense. He was a great blocker. He could catch out of the backfield. He was showing very well in those types of things. Now, I don't know what happened. I don't know why he never got drafted outright, but it is rare for a Canadian to end up on an egg list, and he got picked up by the Riders now. So if they can sign him, I mean, he's a guy that might be able to provide a little bit of depth there behind Messam or whoever they end up going with, and he might be able to, fill in occasionally from time to time. Some people have thought maybe he's a Rob Cote type guy. I don't know if he's going to end up being that good, but the skills are certainly there for him. So there are options, and they're working at it. It's not that they're not trying. They just haven't been successful at building that Canadian depth so far.
No, but I mean, you said it exactly. If you can get Augustine and you can get Jerome Messam, pair them together, make that a truly Canadian position. And again, the reviews I heard from all you guys, from him down at CFL week, I wasn't there, were just absolutely glowing. I think that's a 1-2 punch that you can count on. And anytime you can start a Canadian there, I mean, that always seems to be the problem with the Canadian, going with a Canadian at running back. It's rare that you have the super capable Canadian backup, and I believe that could happen. And I'd love to see that pairing, and I think it would shore up one of the few holes they had on offense. I know they had some good performances, but it was never consistent. It was never reliable. I think Jerome Messam can give you exactly. I mean, he still had 1,000 yards last year, 9 touchdowns, and just people have to respect him while he's back there, right? It just makes everything else more effective. Play action, you name it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at the bottom line, even if Augustine doesn't turn out to be much this year, at the very least, he will be much cheaper than Keenan LaFrance. So at the very least, there's money freed up for something else, like a plate of nachos, perhaps.
Hey, a delicious nachos, which I also alluded to, which you and I think, are both on the same thought. Nachos, to me, is like a top 10 go-to at the bar food. You get a pile of them. You have a lot. It's cheese. It's meat. It's crispy chips, salsa, hot sauce, jalapenos if you want. I will admit, Some of my favorite nachos actually come from the Nutana Curling Club, my home curling club. Man, I love nachos. I wasn't hungry, Joel. I had ribs for supper, but now I'm suddenly hungry.
Well, you haven't had nachos until you've had nachos from Bushwhackers in Regina.
I think I might have to pay a visit. I am coming down for the Briar, so I think we might have to pay a little visit.
You know what we're doing. But I know who we're not going to invite to that, or maybe we should, just to torture them. That would be the Regina Leader Post, Rob Vanstone, who I learned last week on Twitter. I can't remember who originally sent out the tweet that Rob apparently does not like nachos. And it completely blew my mind out of everyone that I would think, like, Rob loves food. Yeah. Just like me, just like you, we're pigs. We love food. So does Rob. And the fact that he doesn't like chips with oven-baked cheese and spice on it, I couldn't wrap my head around it. I was literally flabbergasted, probably for about 10 minutes.
When I saw that, I like I said at the beginning when we were alluding to it, I did lose basically all respect for Rob Vanstone, and I will be filled with disgust every time I read it, because I think he loses all credibility when he doesn't like the nachos. I mean, seriously, it's cheese and chips, melty, delicious cheese. How can you go wrong?
I don't know. It must be the salsa or something, because I mean, you could even get like meat, you can get like chicken, you can get olives if you're into that. There's all kinds of different options that you can put on nachos, and I mean, guac, sour cream, like, come on.
Oh, yes, you got to get the guac. Got to get the guac. Chicken and guac. Chicken is the better nacho meat. The ground beef makes everything soggy and gets everywhere. You've got to have the chicken. So,
I don't know. I also, being a former reporter, did a little bit of digging while someone actually did for me. A source, an anonymous source that I'm going to name anyway because it doesn't really matter because we're talking about food. Bianca Millions, formerly of CTV Regina, now with CTV Edmonton, when she found out that Mr. Vanstone does not appreciate nachos, found out that Rob also, and this one's really gonna blow your mind because I don't think you actually know this. Rob doesn't like poutine either.
What?
Yes. So no poutines and double-doubles for Rob.
Well, grab your poutine and a double-double. Who doesn't like poutine? I have to grab a poutine, and I'm to the point, like, I'll even, like, devour poutine chips.
Yeah.
This Rob Vanstone. No. You know what? Every time I read one of his excellently written articles and see him on Twitter, I'll never be able to look at him the same way. Is he secretly American?
I don't know. Don't Americans love nachos? Because, I mean, it's fairly Mexican, isn't it? And they love Mexican food, especially in the South.
Maybe he's secretly Swedish?
I don't know.
I know very little about this. I know lots about beer. I'm just going to go back to my Nokomis and pour one out on the curb for Mr. Vanstone.
All I really have to say, and this is probably the best way to end it, is you think you know someone.